The door flew open with such force that the family photos on the adjacent wall rattled. Mark Daniels froze, his 6-year-old daughter's half-braided hair still between his fingers as he stared up at his boss, Victoria Chen, standing in his doorway at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning. "You're fired, Mark," she announced, her voice echoing through his modest apartment. His daughter Emma looked between them with wide eyes, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "What?" was all Mark could manage, his heart plummeting. Victoria stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "You're fired from your position as senior account manager," she continued, then softened her voice. "And I'm hiring you as our new creative director. If you're enjoying this story of misunderstanding and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe to catch more heartfelt stories that remind us how life's biggest challenges often lead to unexpected blessings." Mark Daniels had been drowning for months, though he'd never admit it. At 34, he'd become a single father overnight when his wife Lisa died in a car accident 18 months ago. The grief had been all-consuming, but he'd forced himself to function for Emma's sake. He'd returned to work at Chen Marketing after just 2 weeks of bereavement leave, determined to maintain stability in at least one area of their shattered lives. Victoria Chen had been understanding at first. As the founder and CEO of the boutique marketing agency, she'd given Mark flexibility with his hours and deadlines. But lately, her patience seemed to be wearing thin. There were the emails marked urgent that he'd respond to days late. The meetings where he'd arrive unprepared or, worse, not show up at all. The client presentations where his usual creative spark was noticeably absent. What Mark didn't know was that Victoria wasn't frustrated with his performance, she was worried about him. She'd seen the dark circles under his eyes deepen, watched his once immaculate appearance become increasingly disheveled, noticed how he'd lost weight his already lean frame couldn't afford to lose. Most concerning was how he'd withdrawn from the tight-knit team, eating lunch alone and declining invitations to after-work gatherings. "I don't understand," Mark said, his fingers still tangled in Emma's half-finished braid. "Creative director? But that's not even an open position." Victoria smiled, kneeling down to Emma's level. "Hi there. I'm Victoria, your dad's boss. Do you mind if I borrow him for a grown-up talk in the kitchen? I promise I'll give him back so he can finish your beautiful braid." Emma nodded solemnly. "Are you really firing my daddy?" "No, sweetheart. I'm actually giving him a different job, one that might make him happier." While Emma returned to watching cartoons, Mark followed Victoria to his kitchen, which was cluttered with unwashed dishes and half-empty takeout containers. He felt a flush of embarrassment as Victoria took it all in. "Mark, I've been trying to talk to you for weeks," Victoria said, leaning against the counter. "You've been missing all my signals." "Signals about firing me?" he asked, still confused. "Signals about promoting you. The creative director position is new. I'm restructuring the company, and I want you to lead our creative team." Mark shook his head. "That doesn't make any sense. My work has been terrible lately. I've missed deadlines, forgotten meetings." "Your work has been adequate, which for you is terrible," Victoria interrupted. "But even your adequate work is better than most people's best. The problem isn't your talent, Mark. It's that you're drowning." The word hit him like a physical blow. Drowning. Yes, that's exactly how it felt. "I've been watching you try to balance everything, being a single dad, managing major accounts, processing your grief, and it's too much. But instead of asking for help, you've been withdrawing." Mark's throat tightened. "I can't afford to show weakness. Emma needs stability." Victoria's expression softened. "Stability doesn't mean doing everything alone until you break. It means creating sustainable systems of support." She explained her plan. The creative director role would allow Mark to focus on what he did best, developing innovative campaign concepts, while delegating the client-facing responsibilities and administrative tasks that were overwhelming him. The position came with a substantial raise and, most importantly, more flexible hours. But why? Mark asked, genuinely perplexed. Why restructure your company around my problems? Because you're worth it, Victoria said simply. Because I've seen what you can do when you're not drowning. And because I know what it's like to be where you are. For the first time, Mark noticed the dark circles under Victoria's eyes, partially concealed by expertly applied makeup. He'd always seen her as the polished, confident CEO, 15 years his senior and seemingly invincible. My husband died of cancer when my son was 4, she said quietly. I nearly lost my first business trying to do it all alone. I don't want to see that happen to you. The revelation stunned Mark. In the 3 years he'd worked for Victoria, she'd never mentioned a husband or being a single mother. Her son must be grown now. I didn't know, he managed. I don't talk about it much, she admitted. But watching you these past months has brought it all back. The difference is, I didn't have anyone to throw me a lifeline. You do. Mark felt something crack inside him, the rigid shell of self-sufficiency he'd built around himself since Lisa's death. I'm not sure I can accept. This isn't charity, Victoria cut in firmly. This is business. Your creative vision is what our agency needs right now. But you can't give us your best if you're stretched too thin. She laid out the rest of her plan. The company would provide childcare assistance. Mark could work from home 2 days a week. And Victoria had already arranged for a meal delivery service to start that week. Consider it a signing bonus, she said with a wry smile, glancing at the takeout containers. I don't know what to say, Mark admitted. Say yes, Victoria replied. And then let me help you finish Emma's braid so you're not late for your first day as creative director. As they walked back to the living room, Mark felt something he hadn't experienced in 18 months, hope. Not just the desperate hope that he could make it through another day, but genuine hope for a future where he and Emma might actually thrive. Emma looked up as they entered. Is everything okay, Daddy? Mark knelt beside her, his vision blurring with unshed tears. Everything's going to be better than okay, Em. I promise. The transition wasn't seamless. Mark struggled to accept help at first, his pride making him resistant to the support systems Victoria put in place. The first time the company's new part-time nanny arrived to pick Emma up from school when Mark had a late meeting, he called 6 times to check on them. When Victoria suggested he join a grief support group for single parents, he initially refused. But gradually, the lifelines Victoria threw him became a safety net. The creative director role played to his strengths, allowing his natural talent to shine without the administrative burdens that had been crushing him. Working from home 2 days a week meant he could be there when Emma got off the school bus. The meal service meant they ate something other than pizza and cereal for dinner. Most importantly, Mark slowly learned to let people in. He discovered that his colleagues didn't think less of him for needing help. In fact, many stepped up eagerly once they understood his situation. The junior designers he now managed brought fresh energy and ideas that reinvigorated his own creativity. The grief support group Victoria had suggested became a lifeline, connecting him with others who truly understood his struggles. 6 months into his new role, Mark invited Victoria to dinner at his apartment, a real dinner he'd cooked himself, not takeout. Emma had insisted on making the table fancy, with a tablecloth and her special occasion plastic wine glasses. To new beginnings, Victoria said, raising her glass of actual wine while Emma clinked her apple juice. And to people who see what we need before we know it ourselves, Mark added. After Emma went to bed, Mark and Victoria sat on his small balcony, watching the city lights. I never properly thanked you, Mark said quietly. For what? Making a smart business decision? Victoria smiled. For seeing me drowning and jumping in to save me instead of letting me go. Victoria was quiet for a moment. When David, my husband, died, I thought strength meant handling everything myself. It took me years to realize that true strength is knowing when to accept help. I'm still learning that, Mark admitted. We all are, Victoria said. But you're doing better than you think. Emma is thriving. The agency's creative work has never been stronger. And you, she studied his face, you're starting to look like yourself again. It was true. The dark circles under his eyes had faded. He'd gained back the weight he'd lost. And sometimes, when Emma said something funny or when a particularly brilliant campaign idea struck, he found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time since Lisa died. I keep waiting for it to get easier, Mark confessed. Missing Lisa. It doesn't get easier, Victoria said gently. It gets different. The grief changes shape. Some days it's a boulder on your chest, other days it's a stone in your pocket. But you learn to carry it. Mark nodded, understanding completely. How's your son doing now? Jason's 32, married with twins of his own. Victoria smiled. He turned out okay, despite having a workaholic single mom. There were rough patches, plenty of them, but we made it through. The knowledge that Victoria had walked this path before him and emerged on the other side with a grown son who was thriving gave Mark a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Thank you for firing me, he said with a small smile. Victoria laughed. Best firing I've ever done. A year after that fateful morning when Victoria had burst through his door, Mark stood in the agency's conference room, accepting an industry award for a campaign his team had created. Emma sat in the audience between Victoria and the agency's part-time nanny, now a beloved fixture in their lives, beaming with pride. This award belongs to my entire team, Mark said into the microphone, but especially to the person who saw me drowning and refused to let me sink. Victoria, you didn't just save my career, you showed me how to live again. Later that night, after tucking an excited Emma into bed, Mark sat alone in his living room, looking at a photo of Lisa. You'd like the man I'm becoming, he whispered to her image. It took me a while, but I'm finally learning how to carry our love forward instead of being crushed by losing you. The journey from drowning to swimming hadn't been linear. There were still days when grief ambushed him, when single parenthood felt impossible, when he questioned every decision. But those days were no longer the norm. More often now, he found himself present in the moment, truly seeing Emma smile, genuinely engaging with his team, actually tasting the food he ate instead of just consuming it mechanically. And he'd learned the most important lesson Victoria had tried to teach him: strength wasn't about handling everything alone. It was about building a community of support, about knowing when to ask for help, about allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to accept it. As Mark drifted off to sleep that night, he realized something profound. Victoria hadn't just given him a new job title that day she'd burst through his door. She'd given him permission to redefine what success looked like in this new chapter of his life. Success wasn't perfection or complete self-sufficiency. Success was progress, connection, and the courage to keep moving forward even when the path ahead seemed impossible. For the first time since becoming a single father, Mark felt not just that he and Emma would survive, but that they would thrive. And that was a victory worth celebrating. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of resilience, hope, and the unexpected ways we find strength when life knocks us down. Remember, sometimes what feels like the end is actually just the beginning of something beautiful.